So maybe people don't know why was Andy Warhol called Drella?
Yeah, I didn't mention anything. This was 3 years after Andy Warhol died, right. And they decided they would do a memorial or a tribute. I thought it was more like a confessional between them. And Andy was called Cinderella and Dracula, so they made an amalgamation of the name and called them Drella. It wasn't necessarily a name that Andy liked, but that was kind of the name that he was given by his close friends. Mm-hmm. And the evolution of how this got made, Channel 4 reached out to me to shoot it and direct it. I had done a video with Annie Lennox with Derek Jarman, and he was too sick to finish it. And he gave me his home movies, and I projected his home movies on Annie Lennox's face, because she always had white pancake makeup, and she sang Every Time We Say Goodbye. And the British press, had a great reaction to it, so they offered me to do this. But of course I had to meet with Lou and John, because this was being done for British television. And I have to admit, John was supportive, but Lou wasn't so supportive in the beginning. And the first thing he said to me is, I don't want any cameras between me and the audience. We did this they did it like 4 times at St. Anne's Church, and they were doing it another 4 times at BAM, at the Brooklyn Academy of Music. So I said, I don't want any cameras between me and the audience, and I don't want to see any cameras on the stage. So I thought about it, and I went back to him. I said, well, could I shoot the rehearsals? And he said, well, I guess so. So the rehearsals, then I realized that I could have much more intimacy than I ever could if I was off the stage or just had static shots, from the front. So for 2 days, I asked him, all I did is I said, please wear what you're going to wear on the performance. So for 2 days, I just had a dolly shot, and I did something I've always wanted to do with concerts, is move to the emotion and the rhythm of the music. So I would give hand signals to the dolly grip, and that was one aspect of it. And then the actual night of the performance, they allowed us to shoot 2 performances. I did have the cameras way off the stage, and we did a lot of the close-ups. But doing that in the rehearsals, I realized I don't need an audience, that this somehow documents something about Lou and John and their own personal relationship, and also the relationship to Andy. So I also had these wonderful projections that and the other advantage was, generally as a cinematographer or a filmmaker, when you shoot a concert, it's all the way through. You don't get to change anything. You're kind of limited by the stage lighting. But here I could change the lighting to a degree, and the gels. So because I was in rehearsal, I could change them between the songs. So that gave me a lot of freedom. So the limitation became for me an advantage.
Why did you change from color to black and white?
Yeah, that was something, it's called the DI. Back then I could just do a transfer one way. But I had wanted to do, when I had shot it years ago, I had wanted to do certain songs more monochromatic, with not as much color, because I felt they were in the feeling of the song, and the black and white images in the projections were like kind of an homage for Andy to Hollywood movies. So I made the decision in the DI to just make certain songs black and white that I thought emotionally, had a connection to the story or to the song.
I think what's really interesting is you get an idea that Lou Reed might not be the greatest guitarist of all time, but he does really interesting things, a lot more interesting than you notice if you listen to his solo records or if you listen to Velvet Underground. And the sound is very, very transparent, very clear, very precise. So what did you do in the restoration process to enhance the sound?
Well, like I said, I found the negative.
This was 16 millimeter.
Yeah, it was 16. Yeah. Actually, what happened was I had reached out to Channel 4, which was the who commissioned it, and the film company that was no more in England, and nobody knew where it was, and then we reached out to Warner Brothers, who did not a very good laser disc. But lo and behold, the lab closed in New York that I was using DuArt. And I told them at the time, like 4 years ago, 4 years ago, please send any of the negative with my name on it so things wouldn't be lost. And then during the pandemic, I had the opportunity of going through, hundreds of, not kidding, hundreds of boxes in my loft. And lo and behold, there was the A and B rolls, the original negative. But I didn't have the sound. I had an optical track, which is something you have from a completed film, but it's not the best. And I had the laser disc. So we went back to Warner Brothers, and they found, miraculously, which they shouldn't have lost, but they did, the original mix for the concert. So, but they didn't sync up because they had changed the songs, order, and they had changed some of the lyrics. But I found somebody also in New York who did sound restoration, and he sunk it up, the original mix. So I actually have the best sound and the best picture you possibly can have. And I think this album was always kind of an underrated album. So that was one other reason why I wanted to find it and restore it. So that was...
But I think the live performance gives it some sort of extra quality, which is...
Well, I think
because I know the album.
He remixed it.
Ah, okay. Mm-hmm. Is there any questions from the audience? Please, take a microphone.
It's not a question per se, but could you elaborate on the 100 feet away from your bed you mentioned earlier?
Yeah, just all these boxes came back, and literally it was about 100 feet from me where this negative was. When I was going through different things with an assistant, and I go, what's that? Oh my God, there's songs for Drella. So that's where it was. And then I also found that was on a print, a 16 millimeter print of the Berlin album. That was also not far from that. So I'm going to be looking for other things.
How were personal relationships between John and Lou at the time? Because they broke up in '68. They didn't do anything, as far as I know, in between. And they just did this.
They hadn't worked together for 20 years. They came together for this, and then,
they became friends again. Not
well, really. For this album, but then it kind of fell apart again. Okay. It was, Lou always had to be in control, and he actually had fired, if you see that in the Velvet Underground, he fired John, and then he fired Andy. And I think it was because he wanted to be more popular. He wanted to be more of a popular rock musician, and he felt, John was, pushing the art side of it, and Andy was in a similar vein. So he wanted to break away from them to be something else.
But the interesting thing is that after Velvet Underground, John Cale did quite poppy records, song-oriented stuff. So basically, why not stay and do the thing? In
I can't answer that.
Yeah, we could ask John, but he's not around.
But this was the last original piece of work that they did together. They both came together, I guess, for Cartier Foundation and at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but they never did anything original together.
Where did the idea come from that you do these projections, which looks a little bit like the exploding plastic inevitable on a micro scale, but you use some of the projections from the factory. Sometimes, especially in the Valerie Solanas song, it's very dominant visually. So,
well, we wanted to keep the feeling of the Warhol period, and everyone always thought Warhol was a Svengali or a voyeurist, and so this was kind of another way of implementing his spirit around them. And that was really, part of that was from the show, that
this is a part of the
Jerry
show.
Serling,
Okay.
and then I enhanced that and we did some others.
How many cameras did you use? There were 6 operators,
Yeah,
I would say.
I used one camera for all the rehearsals, and then I used multiple cameras on the night of the shoot. The night of their performance.
Was there some sort of preconceived choreography, how you position the cameras?
Yeah, I always think I call it the zone system when I used to shoot a lot of concerts, that each camera would have a responsibility, and I wanted this very minimalistic, again, to capture kind of that sensibility of imagery that the way they, in the 60s, images were created. So I just said, you're the wide shot from the master, you have the over the shoulder, you have the close up, and I just let them roll with that.
And the editing?
Yeah, I was very fortunate. I worked with a documentary editor, but he really enhanced the rhythm of what I was trying to do with the camera. Sometimes editing can improve what you're doing, and sometimes it can go against what you're doing. And that's a frustration for a cinematographer, is when you're trying to set a style with the director, and then in the editing they maybe change that, sometimes for the better. But I was so lucky that I had the control, I call it the control of the image, so I could try to do what I was doing when I was photographing.
Okay. Is there any more questions from the audience? No. It looks like we are doing a good job.
Thank you for staying
no questions
so late.
left. Yeah. But let's talk about the small promo clip for Berlin, which is also interesting. So you have this small written insert where you say Lou Reed didn't quite remember that you did this work.
Well, when we did this video, it was 48 years ago. Nobody even knew what videos were. There wasn't MTV. They were actually made for, I don't know if they had those in Austria or Europe, but they conceived an idea of video jukeboxes. In other words, you would put the money in a jukebox and you would see your favorite musicians play the music, and you would see them on a little monitor. So this was originally conceived for that. And like I say, he came up to the camera when I was setting it up and kicked the tripod. And I didn't know what was going on. I was in shock. And then he smiled and just walked back to the microphone. But I never said anything to him about it, certainly then. And then we shot it. And then I kiddingly said something to him when we were doing songs after a few days. Do you remember that situation? He said, I don't remember anything from back then. So that was that.
Okay. I think last question from my side, because Lou Reed was here once. He was also in the cinema. He was up there. And I was fortunate not to have this conversation because the interviewer was breaking out in tears because he was so rude. So how How was it to work with Lou Reed, actually?
Well, actually, after, you know, I came back and said, could I shoot the rehearsals? And I think it was about the work, the way they talk about it in the song. He saw what I was trying to do, and we didn't really talk about it. And I know he saw it after, and I ran into him a few times after that, and he was always very pleasant with me.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So it's last chance to put some questions to Ed. Okay, there's a question.
How was John Cale in comparison to Lou? And what did they think about the result of the film you shot for Channel 4?
You know, it was strange because I did the piece, then I edited it, and then it got sent to England, and then that was that, you know, and then they made this laser disc, and I really, strangely enough, just, you know, re-photographed John Cale for the Velvet Underground, and that's probably, you know, 30 years later, I saw him again. I just didn't have any opportunity to see him or say anything to him about it, and that was that.
But what was the purpose of the movie? Was there a commercial release, or what did they do with the movie?
What, this?
This one, yeah.
Oh, this was just shown as a concert film for Channel 4 commission. It was shown
for TV,
for
only for
television.
TV. Okay,
Yeah.
I see.
That was another reason why I shot so many close-ups, because I thought back then we always said the close-ups were the medium for the television. So I thought, oh, I'll just be right in there with them, you know, emotionally. I'll be as close as I can be.
Yeah. Which feels a little bit uncanny if you see it on a screen like that.
Yeah, well, then why I wanted to finish it, because I felt it was a kind of a performance piece, conceptually, that it would play well on a big screen.
Yeah. Which it finally does. Okay, thanks, Ed, a lot for this very insightful information.
Thank you.
Yeah. And if there are no more questions, I would close the conversation at this point. The movie will be shown again tomorrow at 8 o'clock. I forgot the cinema, unfortunately. The Stadtkino, yeah. Tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Tell your friends that they show up, and we'll be back tomorrow, I would say. So thanks a lot, and applause for Ed.